We all make agreements every single day. Some are simple, some are complex. But what if I told you that a contract, even one that's perfectly written and signed by everyone, could be totally and completely worthless? It's true. If the entire point of an agreement is against the law, it's like it has a built-in self-destruct button. Today, we're diving deep into this critical part of contract law, the legality of the object in consideration. So here's our game plan for this explainer. We're going to walk through the whole landscape of these illegal agreements. We'll start with a basic trap, then look at deals the law flat out forbids. We'll get into the murky waters of fraud and immorality, and then tackle the really fascinating idea of public policy. We'll also figure out what happens when just one part of a deal is bad. And finally, we'll look at the pretty harsh consequences of getting this wrong. So let's kick things off with the big question. What actually makes a contract just implode? We're not talking about small stuff here, like a typo or a missing signature. This is something much more fundamental. The law can look right into the heart of your deal and decide that from the very beginning it was never a real contract at all. And here it is, the golden rule, straight from Section 23 of the Indian Contract Act. For any contract to be legit, two things have to be lawful, the object and the consideration. Think of it like this. The object is the purpose of the deal. What are you trying to accomplish? And the consideration is the what's in it for me part, the exchange of value. If either one of these is unlawful, the entire agreement just shatters. It's like a chain. Both links have to be strong or the whole thing is useless. All right, let's dive into the most obvious category. These are the agreements where the law has drawn a very clear, bright red line. These are things that are explicitly, no questions asked, forbidden. So, the law has two main ways of saying no. The first is super straightforward. An agreement is void if what you're trying to do is flat out illegal and punishable, like a contract to commit a crime. But the second way is a little more subtle. An agreement is also void if, even though the act itself isn't a crime, allowing it would completely undermine the purpose of some other law. Let's look at a couple of cases. It'll make perfect sense. Here's a perfect example of that first type. In this case, Sitaram versus Kunj Lal, there was a law that put a cap on the price of jaggery. Well, these two parties made a deal to sell it for more than that legal price. As you can guess, the court took one look at it and said, nope, this is void. It was a direct violation of the law. You just can't make a contract to do something a statute says you can't do. Now for that more subtle version. In this case, the Bangalore Development Authority had really specific rules about when a person could sell property they'd been allotted. An agreement was made that basically tried to find a loophole around those rules. Now, selling property isn't illegal, right? But the Supreme Court said that if they allowed this particular sale, it would make the BDA's rules completely pointless. So the agreement was void because it was designed to defeat the spirit of the law. Okay, so we've covered agreements that break a specific law. Now we're moving into territory where the intention behind the deal is the real problem. We're talking about agreements that are basically built on a foundation of lies, harm, or stuff that society just considers wrong. So what are we talking about here? Well, it boils down to three main things. First, if the whole point of the agreement is to commit fraud. Second, if it involves hurting someone or damaging their property. Think things like assault or defamation. And third, if a court looks at the purpose of the agreement and decides it's just plain immoral by society's standards. And here's a textbook case of a fraudulent agreement. A guy knew the railway company wouldn't give him a contract directly. So what did he do? He made a deal with someone else to apply for the contract for him, essentially as a frontman. The entire purpose of their agreement was to deceive the railway company. The court, not surprisingly, said the agreement was void because its object was fraud. Now, this idea of what's immoral, that's a tricky one. It's not written in stone. It actually changes as society evolves. For example, a court once ruled that a landlord who knowingly rented his house to be used for prostitution couldn't sue for the rent. Why? Because the very purpose of that rental agreement was considered immoral. Other classic examples include deals that interfere with a marriage, or even agreements between a husband and wife to separate in the future because they're seen as undermining the institution of marriage itself. And now we arrive at the big one. This is the broadest, most powerful, and maybe most interesting category, agreements that are void simply because they go against public policy. You can think of this as the law's ultimate safety net, designed to catch harmful agreements that don't necessarily break any other specific rule. Just as the slide says, you can't just flip open a law book and find a neat little definition of public policy. It's a concept that courts have developed over centuries to protect the overall good of the community. It's flexible on purpose, it allows the law to adapt to new kinds of harm, and to keep up with society's changing values. So, what kind of things fall under this umbrella? Well, here are some of the heavy hitters. First, any agreement to trade with an enemy during wartime. That's a clear threat to national security. Second, any deal that messes with the justice system, like paying a witness to change their story. And a really big one is an agreement to stifle prosecution. That's when you agree to drop a criminal case in exchange for money. Criminal law is about wrongs against society, not private disputes, so you can't just settle it on the side.
All right, here's a pair of old legal terms: maintenance and champerty. Maintenance is basically helping someone with their lawsuit when you have no personal stake in it. Champerty is taking it a step further. You help fund the lawsuit in exchange for a slice of whatever they win. Now, in India, these aren't automatically illegal. If you're genuinely helping someone access justice, that's fine. But if your goal is just to stir up litigation or gamble on lawsuits for profit, then that's considered against public policy.
And the list keeps going. We're talking about agreements to sell public offices, which obviously leads to corruption, deals that try to take away a parent's legal rights over their child, marriage brokerage contracts, paying someone to find you a spouse. In the business world, any agreements that kill competition, like price fixing, are a huge no-no. And fundamentally, any agreement that tries to restrain someone's personal freedom can be struck down as being against the public good. So this brings up a really practical question. What happens if only part of your deal is illegal? Is the whole thing ruined, or can you just save the good parts and throw out the bad? Well, the law actually has a pretty logical way of handling this. So can you save a partially illegal deal? The answer is maybe. It depends. First, if the legal and illegal parts are so tangled up that you can't separate them, the whole thing is void. Think of it like a cake that has a little bit of poison baked into it. You can't just cut out the bad part. But if you have a set of separate, reciprocal promises, the court can enforce the legal promises and just ignore the illegal ones. And finally, if an agreement gives someone an alternative, do this legal thing or do this illegal thing, the court can force them to do the legal thing. We've seen all the ways an agreement can be illegal. But now we need to talk about the consequences. What happens when you've already paid money or done something, only to find out the deal was void from the start? This is where the law gets very, very strict. This number says everything you need to know: 0. That's how much money the law will help you get back if you've paid it as part of an illegal agreement. The court essentially just walks away and leaves the parties exactly where they are. So let's break down the fallout. First, the illegal agreement itself is totally void. It's like it never happened. Second, and this is crucial, any related deals are also void. So if you take out a loan specifically to fund an illegal act and the lender knows about it, that loan agreement is tainted and also void. The illegality spreads like a virus. And third, and this is the really harsh part, there's no restitution. You can't go to court to get your money back or your property returned. The court simply refuses to help anyone involved in an illegal transaction. So we end right back where we started. Every single agreement has a purpose, an object. And now you know to look past the fancy words and the signatures and ask the most important question of all. Before you make a deal, what's its real object? Because if that object is forbidden or fraudulent or immoral or against the public good, then what you have isn't a contract. It's just a legal ghost.